The apartment smelled faintly of chamomile and worn leather, comforting in a way that made me almost forget the weight of our routine life. Leo had been tinkering with his podcast equipment all morning, and I'd taken the quiet time to make tea, humming under my breath while the kettle hissed. I liked the rhythm of domestic normalcy, the careful placement of teaspoons, the way the steam curled over my favorite mug, the soft tick of the wall clock marking minutes I had no rush to count. Leo, of course, had no interest in domestic rhythms. He was already half a step ahead, juggling cables, microphones, and recording software with the ease of someone who had convinced themselves that life's excitement could be engineered through sound waves and follower counts. I loved him, still do, I told myself, but the love had started to feel like a schedule. We had a future plotted down to the weekend when we would finally pick a wedding venue, or the month when he'd start putting together the dream kitchen. It was less thrilling than it was comforting. Sometimes too comforting. I carried my tea into the living room, expecting to see him tinkering with his newest recorder as he had been since dawn. And there it was. The sleek microphone sat on the coffee table, connected to the headphones he'd left lying across the cushion. Normally, I would have asked him what he was doing, maybe teased him about recording my humming. But today, a curious impulse, fueled by a strange blend of boredom and intuition, made me pick up the headphones and slip them over my ears. The sound hit immediately. Crisp, alive, and undeniable. Only, it wasn't just the familiar hum of Leo's voice guiding him through software settings. There was another voice, too, lighter, warmer, intoxicatingly confident. I froze, tea halfway to my lips, my heart starting a slow drumbeat that I couldn't silence. At first, I told myself it was nothing. Maybe it was a collaborator, someone from the podcast, another guest, a distant voice I wouldn't recognize. Then I heard the names. Zara. Leo. They weren't whispering about sound waves or episode topics. They were talking about vacations, shared spaces, plans that didn't include me. And we should officially move in together once I get the big move done. You know, ditching the apartment and the wedding plans. It's just easier to handle it quietly now. Leo's words felt like a punch to the gut. My hands trembled against the smooth plastic of the headphones. My breath caught. He said it with that casual inflection, the one he used when explaining spreadsheet formulas or booking flights. Normal. Ordinary. Everyday. Zara's laugh followed, bright, unapologetic. Good. Let's make sure the yoga master doesn't get wind of this until the lease is signed. I dropped the headphones. They clattered to the hardwood floor, and the tea in my hand sloshed, soaking the edge of my sleeve. My mind was a whirlwind of disbelief, nausea, and an icy clarity. He had been planning this, the parallel life, the silent replacement, without a single hint. All those weekend plans, all those conversations about our future, they were a lie. Time slowed. I could hear the faint hum of the refrigerator, the distant honk of a car outside, and the raw, undeniable truth echoing inside my chest. Betrayal is never loud. It's quiet. It's intimate. And it's devastating. I didn't scream. I didn't cry yet. I just stood, frozen, trying to grasp the enormity of it, until movement from the hallway startled me. Dean and Alex appeared, naturally brimming with their usual energy and chaos. I couldn't speak. Words failed. I shoved the headphones into Alex's hands, pointing toward the spare room. His eyes narrowed, and in those 10 seconds, he understood everything. There was no need for explanations. He stormed into the spare room with a protective intensity that had always scared me a little, yes, but now felt like the exact kind of fire I had been missing. His presence was commanding, undeniable, a promise that no one would cross the line with me while he was around. Standing there, watching him confront Leo, something in me shifted. The man I had dismissed as too intense years ago wasn't just intense. He was fiercely loyal, unwavering, the kind of person who would defend me without hesitation. I realized, with a jolt, that perhaps the person I truly needed wasn't Leo at all. Perhaps the person who had been waiting for me, quietly, all along, was Alex. For the first time in months, I felt a spark, not from routine, not from comfort, but from the raw, electric certainty that I was finally, really being seen. The apartment felt impossibly small after what I had just heard. The walls, once familiar and comforting, now seemed to close in, echoing the duplicity I had uncovered. Every corner, every cushion, every framed photograph felt tainted by Leo's betrayal. I sank onto the couch, trying to steady my racing thoughts, but the adrenaline in my veins refused to calm. The warm tea I had been holding was now cold, forgotten, a reminder of the ordinary life that had been quietly dismantled around me. Alex was beside me in a heartbeat, the protective fury I had glimpsed just moments ago still simmering in his eyes. He didn't speak immediately. There was no need. His presence was enough, a silent declaration that I was no longer alone in this. He knew what Leo had done, and more importantly, he understood how I felt. The tension between us was palpable, almost electric, a mix of relief, anger, and something far more personal. Dean hovered awkwardly, clearly unsure of whether to step in or give us space. I waved him off, needing the intimacy of Alex's support without an audience. The apartment was quiet again, except for the faint hum of city life outside, but it no longer felt safe. Betrayal has a way of reshaping the places you once called home. I looked at Alex and, for the first time in years, noticed the way his expression softened when it was just the two of us. It wasn't teasing or playful. It was serious, protective, and unwavering. My chest tightened as I realized that what had always intimidated me about him, the intensity, the passion, the refusal to back down, was exactly what I had been missing in Leo. Leo had offered comfort, predictability, the illusion of stability. Alex offered honesty, loyalty, and a fire that made my heart race in a way that no routine could. I tried to speak, to explain the maelstrom of feelings inside me, but my voice caught in my throat. Instead, I let myself lean slightly into him, seeking that grounding presence I had always dismissed. Alex didn't pull away. Instead, he placed a steadying hand on my shoulder, light but firm, letting me know that it was okay to feel everything at once, the hurt, the anger, the confusion. "It's over," he said finally, his voice low, deliberate.
"He's gone.
You don't have to deal with this anymore." I wanted to believe him. I wanted to feel the kind of relief that comes from someone else taking the weight of betrayal off your shoulders. But part of me was still numb, suspended in the shock of realizing that the man I had loved and trusted was capable of such calculated deception. I didn't need words of comfort. I needed proof, action, something tangible to hold onto amidst the wreckage of my feelings. Alex seemed to understand without me saying it. His hand slid from my shoulder to gently brush my hair back from my face, his fingers lingering for just a moment longer than necessary. There was a subtle energy in that touch, a promise, a boundary, a question all at once. I felt a flicker of something I hadn't allowed myself to feel in years. Hope. We sat together in silence, the world outside continuing without pause, and yet inside the apartment, time seemed suspended. I realized, painfully and beautifully, that what had once been comfortable and predictable with Leo now felt hollow. What I had dismissed as intensity in Alex was exactly what I needed, someone who would fight for me, see me, and refuse to let me be treated with anything less than respect. And then, without thinking, I found myself inching just a fraction closer to him. Alex's eyes met mine, dark, steady, and full of unspoken understanding. There was a subtle charge in the air, something I had never allowed myself to acknowledge before. It was more than friendship. It was more than loyalty. It was a pull, a gravity, drawing me towards someone who had always been there, waiting patiently while I learned the hard way what I truly deserved. I realized that the comfort I had mistaken for love was just a placeholder. The intensity, the care, the unwavering support I had always feared in Alex was the real thing, the kind of love that doesn't just survive betrayal, but makes you stronger because of it. For the first time in months, maybe years, I allowed myself to breathe, to feel, and to hope. And in that quiet, tentative moment, I sensed that the journey ahead with Alex wasn't just about healing. It was about rediscovering what it meant to be truly, passionately alive. The morning after the revelation, I woke to a strange, disoriented quiet. Leo's apartment, which had once felt like home, now felt foreign, too big, too silent, and too full of betrayal. I had spent the night at Alex's place, and even though his couch wasn't particularly comfortable, there was a sense of safety there that I hadn't realized I was craving. The city outside had already begun its morning rhythm, but inside, I felt cocooned, protected, and most surprisingly, seen. Alex moved around the kitchen with a natural ease, making coffee the way he always did, strong, black, exactly how I liked it. His presence was grounding, an unspoken reassurance that the chaos of yesterday didn't define me. I sat on the edge of his counter, still in my coat, watching him with a mix of gratitude and curiosity. It was impossible not to notice the subtle strength in his frame, the way his hands moved with precision and confidence. I remembered, sharply, why I had once been intimidated by him, and now, why I was drawn to him. "Sleep okay?" he asked, glancing over his shoulder, a half-smile tugging at the corner of his lips. It wasn't teasing, it was warm, gentle, and full of care. "Better than I expected," I admitted, letting myself relax into the comfort he offered. "Better than I would have at home, that's for sure." Alex's eyes met mine, and there was a flicker of something unspoken, a shared acknowledgement of what had happened, a silent agreement that he had been there for me when I needed someone most. He leaned against the counter closer to me, just enough for our arms to brush, a subtle touch that made my chest tighten. I realized that the boundaries I had once maintained with him, out of fear or overcaution, no longer seemed necessary. Here, in this quiet morning, there was trust and a tentative, exciting possibility of something more. I found myself teasing, lightly, almost unconsciously. "You make a mean cup of coffee for someone who's supposed to be just a friend," I said, watching his reaction. He chuckled softly, a sound that made my pulse quicken. "I think I make it meaner for people I actually care about," he replied, eyes lingering on mine just a second too long. The warmth in his gaze was undeniable, and I felt a shiver of anticipation. For the first time since the previous night, I allowed myself to acknowledge the feelings I had buried under years of familiarity and friendship. There was a spark here, a subtle, growing attraction that wasn't just about comfort or protection. It was about recognition. Alex understood me in a way Leo never had. He could see past the carefully constructed layers I put around myself. He cared not for convenience or routine, but for my happiness, my well-being, and my heart. As we moved through the morning together, small touches, a brush of his hand against mine, a shared laugh over an overly strong espresso, the way our shoulders occasionally bumped, began to build a rhythm of intimacy. I realized that trust wasn't just about believing someone wouldn't hurt you. It was about knowing that someone would actively protect you, stand by you, and even delight in your presence. Alex had been doing all of that quietly and consistently. At one point, he passed behind me in the kitchen to grab the sugar, and I felt the heat of his body against mine. Our eyes met briefly in the reflection of the window, and I caught that look, the one that asked a question, made a promise, and tested boundaries all at once. My heart raced, and I felt a rush of something bold, impulsive, and thrilling. Without thinking, I leaned just slightly closer, letting the distance between us shrink. Alex's gaze softened, and he didn't pull away. Instead, he tilted his head, that half-smile returning, daring me, inviting me. In that moment, I realized that this wasn't just about recovering from betrayal. This was about moving forward, about embracing a connection that felt safe, real, and electric. And somewhere deep inside, I knew that this was only the beginning. Our slow, deliberate dance towards something neither of us had expected but both of us secretly hoped for, a love born from trust, understanding, and the kind of passion that had nothing to do with convenience or obligation. The morning sun filtered through the blinds, catching the dust in the air, turning the kitchen into a private world of warmth and possibility. And for the first time in a long while, I felt something I hadn't allowed myself to feel in years. Hope. And maybe, just maybe, something more. The following days felt surreal, as though the world had shifted slightly, tilting in a direction I hadn't anticipated. I returned to my apartment to gather a few essentials, but instead of feeling dread, I felt a strange sense of liberation. Leo's betrayal had stripped away the comfortable routine I had clung to, and in its place, a raw, unfiltered clarity had emerged. I no longer wanted predictability. I wanted honesty, passion, someone who would show up, not just exist. Alex was waiting outside, leaning casually against his car as I stepped onto the street. His presence was grounding, like the first solid footing after walking across a rickety bridge. He didn't ask questions. He didn't need to. I could see in his eyes that he already understood the gravity of what had happened, and that he was here to support me, not to interrogate, but to guide, to protect, to share the silence that often carried more weight than words. "Ready?" he asked, a teasing edge to his tone, though his eyes remained soft. I smiled despite myself, the tension easing slightly. "As ready as I'll ever be," I replied. There was a flutter in my chest, a nervous energy I hadn't felt in years. We drove in companionable silence, the city lights blurring past. The subtle brush of his hand against mine on the center console was deliberate, intimate, but not overwhelming, an acknowledgement that boundaries existed, yet something new and fragile was emerging between us. Every glance, every half-smile, felt like a carefully placed brushstroke on a canvas of trust we were beginning to paint together. When we arrived at a quiet cafe tucked away from the main streets, I realized that I was nervous, not about what we would do, but about how I would navigate the feelings that were quietly unfurling inside me. Alex had always been intense, and I had dismissed it as overwhelming when I was younger. But now, after the chaos of betrayal and loss, his intensity felt like a lifeline, a promise that someone would fight for me, see me, and cherish me in ways I had long forgotten were possible. We sat across from each other, coffee steaming between us, and the conversation began cautiously. At first, it was mundane, updates on work, mutual acquaintances, small talk, but slowly the barriers fell. I laughed freely at one of his dry, subtle jokes, and I noticed him leaning in just a little closer, his eyes locking with mine with a warmth that made my pulse quicken. Each glance, each small touch, felt like an unspoken admission. We were testing the waters, measuring the potential of this connection that had been simmering beneath the surface for years. At one point, I reached for my sugar packet and accidentally brushed his hand. Neither of us pulled away. Instead, the brush lingered a moment longer than necessary, a spark igniting in the space between us. My breath caught, and I realized that I wanted this, wanted him to be closer, wanted the intensity of his presence. He caught my subtle signal, tilting his head, a slow, knowing smile playing at the corners of his lips. There was a brief pause, a suspended moment that felt both infinite and immediate. I felt an almost magnetic pull toward him, a force that made my heart beat faster and my thoughts scatter. Alex's hand followed mine, fingers intertwining naturally, a bold yet careful claim of intimacy. I swallowed hard, aware of the chemistry building between us, aware of the trust and care that had replaced the fear I had once carried around him. The cafe around us seemed to fade, the background noise becoming a soft hum as I focused entirely on Alex. I realized that what I had dismissed as intensity and chaos in the past was actually the foundation of something real, a protective, passionate connection that had been waiting patiently for me to notice. As we left the cafe, hands still brushing occasionally, I felt a newfound strength inside me. I no longer needed to cling to comfort or routine. I no longer feared intensity or passion. Alex had always been there, quietly loyal, quietly devoted, waiting for the right moment for both of us to step forward. And now, as I walked beside him, I understood that the trust, care, and growing attraction between us could lead to something profound, something I had been unknowingly waiting for all along. And in that unspoken agreement, that subtle tension and shared laughter, I felt it, a fragile, thrilling hope that maybe, just maybe, this was the start of something extraordinary. The next few days blurred together in a mix of stolen moments and careful observation. I couldn't help but notice how different life felt with Alex by my side. There was no pretension, no agenda, no hidden layers. He simply existed, and that existence was steady, warm, and undeniable. It was intoxicating, especially after the chaos Leo had left behind. We met again at a quiet art gallery opening, a mutual interest we'd never explored together before. I arrived early, feeling this strange thrill of anticipation, my pulse quickening at the thought of seeing him. When Alex walked in, the dim lighting catching the angles of his face, I felt the familiar tug in my chest. He smiled, a mixture of mischief and warmth, and my breath caught. "You made it," he said, his voice low, almost a purr. There was a teasing lilt in his tone that I had always noticed, but now, after everything, it felt more personal. "I wouldn't miss it," I replied, matching his subtle grin. As we moved through the gallery, our hands brushed occasionally, each touch light but deliberate. I felt the small sparks that had been building all week, a quiet electricity between us. It wasn't rushed or forced. It was patient, teasing, and thrilling all at once. Alex had a way of making the ordinary feel charged. When he leaned close to examine a painting, the faint scent of his cologne drifted over me, and I realized I was holding my breath. He noticed, of course, and the corner of his mouth twitched in amusement, as if he knew the effect he had on me and relished it without arrogance. Later, we stepped outside onto the gallery's small terrace, the city lights shimmering below. The cool night air felt like a promise, crisp and inviting. We leaned on the railing side by side, shoulders occasionally brushing, sharing an unspoken conversation in glances and smiles. There was something deliberate in the way he lingered near me, something that made my heart rate spike and my mind focus entirely on him. "You've changed," he said suddenly, his eyes on mine, voice quiet and earnest. "Not in the way you think, I mean you're stronger. More fearless. I like it." I laughed softly, a little breathless. "Is that your polite way of saying I don't fall for obvious jerks anymore?" I teased. He chuckled, leaning a fraction closer, close enough for our hands to brush again.
"Exactly.
You're wise and patient, and honestly, you deserve someone who notices every little thing about you." I felt heat rush to my cheeks. There was a tension in the space between us, subtle but undeniable. His gaze lingered, assessing, measuring, patient yet inviting. I realized I didn't need to be cautious or guarded anymore. Here, with Alex, it was safe to feel, to respond, to finally acknowledge the flutter in my chest that had been growing since the night he had stood by me. The moment stretched, and something inside me shifted, a quiet, bold impulse to finally cross the threshold. I stepped slightly closer, letting my hand touch his arm in a light, accidental-seeming brush. He caught it instantly, his thumb stroking mine ever so gently, and the warmth that spread through me was dizzying. Without thinking, without hesitation, I tilted my head, letting my breath mingle with his. Alex responded immediately, leaning in, his lips finding mine in a kiss that was careful at first, slow, testing, filled with unspoken questions and promises. Then, as if the weeks of tension and longing had been waiting for this exact moment, the kiss deepened, hungry but tender, fierce yet safe. My hands rested on his chest, feeling the strength beneath, the solid presence that had always made me feel protected. When we finally pulled back, our foreheads pressed together, I realized I was smiling, heart pounding. The city lights seemed to shine brighter, the cool night air sweeter. For the first time in what felt like forever, I didn't feel fear, betrayal, or loss. I felt connection, trust, and the thrilling spark of something new and right. Alex's voice was soft, low, teasing, yet intimate. "About time," he murmured, brushing a strand of hair from my face. I laughed quietly, leaning into him. "Yeah, it's about time." And in that moment, under the soft glow of the city, I knew that this, us, was only beginning. The days after that first kiss felt surreal, like stepping into a world I hadn't dared to enter before. Every message from Alex, every casual plan to meet, was charged with a tension that made my pulse quicken. It was playful, careful, and daring all at once. I had never realized how safe it could feel to let someone in so fully, how thrilling it could be to trust completely after betrayal had made me cage my heart for so long. Our mornings began with casual texts, teasing, little jokes about the most mundane things. "Don't burn the toast," he'd write, and I'd reply with something equally silly, our words carrying the ease of a friendship transformed. Yet beneath the humor was a subtle undercurrent, awareness of what had changed, of the new lines being drawn between us, marked with gentle flirtation and tentative desire. When we finally saw each other in person, the world shifted again. We went for long walks, sharing stories that had never found their way into our casual conversations before. He listened, not just hearing, but absorbing the words, nodding at the small details, remembering them later with a teasing remark or an affectionate glance. It was a profound attention I hadn't realized I craved, a contrast to the thoughtless, careless intimacy I had once tolerated. At a small coffee shop, tucked away from the bustling city, I found myself sitting across from him, our knees nearly touching beneath the table. He reached across, fingers brushing mine in a gesture that felt deliberate yet tentative, as if testing the waters. My heart skipped, and I didn't pull away. Instead, I let the warmth linger, savoring the subtle connection building between us. Every glance, every shared smile carried unspoken promises. "Did you always plan to be this impossible to ignore?" I asked, teasing lightly, though my voice carried more curiosity than jest. Alex smirked, leaning closer, the faint scent of his cologne mixing with the warmth of the cafe. "Only when it matters," he said, eyes locking with mine. "And trust me, right now, it matters a lot." The simplicity of it, the honesty, the quiet confidence, made my chest ache with relief. I realized that I didn't have to negotiate my boundaries with him, didn't have to tiptoe through a maze of hidden agendas. Here, the flirtation was a mutual dance, playful and electric, yet anchored in trust. It was thrilling and terrifying, exhilarating and grounding all at once. Later, as we left the cafe, walking side by side under the streetlights, I felt the subtle weight of his hand against mine. It wasn't a demand or a declaration, just a gentle alignment, a promise that we were moving forward together. I responded instinctively, pressing my fingers lightly against his. The contact was electric, small, intimate, but enough to make me aware of how deeply I had missed this kind of closeness, how much I had yearned for someone who truly saw me. We stopped at a quiet overlook, the city sprawled below us like a glittering tapestry. Alex turned to me, his expression soft, intense, yet light with teasing amusement. "You know," he said, "this is the part where I confess I've been imagining this exact moment for weeks." I laughed, a little breathless, feeling the heat rise to my cheeks. "Oh, really?" I said, letting my voice carry the flirtation. "And what exactly did you imagine?" He stepped closer, the space between us shrinking deliberately. His hand brushed against mine again, lingering longer this time. "Exactly this," he said, voice low, the corner of his mouth curving in a smile that made my heart stutter. Me figuring out how to get this right together." For a moment, the world seemed to fade. The city lights, the distant hum of traffic, even the memories of betrayal melted away, leaving only the warmth of his hand, the steady rhythm of his presence, and the undeniable connection sparking between us. I realized then that this was more than flirtation. It was trust in motion, affection taking shape, a quiet declaration of something that could grow into a love built not on convenience or routine, but on choice and care. As we stood there, fingers entwined and eyes locked, I felt a thrill of anticipation. We were navigating something entirely new, tentative yet thrilling. And in that moment, I understood that whatever lay ahead, we were in it together, learning, trusting, and discovering the joy of a connection that had always been waiting, quietly, for the right time to flourish. The days after our cafe outing felt like walking on a new path, one I had long avoided but secretly craved. Every time Alex and I met, I felt that thrilling blend of ease and anticipation, like the first step on a trail I had always known was there but had never dared to follow. There was no pressure, no past baggage intruding, only the quiet, magnetic pull of someone who truly understood me. We spent the morning at a local market, wandering between stalls, sampling fresh bread and fruit, exchanging playful quips about the oddities of the vendors. I noticed the way Alex's eyes lingered on me, not in a possessive or judgmental way, but in a way that made me feel seen. Every laugh we shared, every brush of hands, carried an intimacy I had never realized I'd been missing. At one point, a vendor leaned too close to offer us a sample, and Alex stepped instinctively in front of me, lightly brushing my arm as he guided me back. My pulse quickened, not from fear, but from the warmth of his attentiveness. It was subtle, a small gesture, yet it spoke volumes. I realized then that this was the difference between Alex and anyone I had ever known. He noticed, he cared, and he acted without grand declarations, letting his devotion show in everyday moments. We found a small bench under a tree, the sunlight filtering through the leaves, casting dappled patterns on the pavement. Alex leaned back, watching me with that calm, mischievous smile. I caught myself leaning just a little closer than necessary, brushing my leg against his, feeling the quiet thrill of proximity. "You know," he said, tilting his head, "I think we're making the perfect team." His voice was light, teasing, but there was something deeper beneath the humor. I laughed softly, nudging him with my shoulder. "Perfect? We barely even have a plan, you know." "Plans are overrated," he replied, eyes glinting. "What matters is that we're here, figuring it out together. And that's perfect enough for me." The simplicity of his words, the honesty in his gaze, made my chest tighten. I wanted to lean into him, to close the space between us, to let the unspoken feelings finally surface. My hand brushed his knee, almost accidentally, and he didn't flinch. Instead, he let his fingers rest lightly atop mine, the contact deliberate, yet gentle, a quiet affirmation that this connection wasn't fleeting. We sat like that for a while, letting the world continue around us, wrapped in a cocoon of shared warmth and subtle tension. I felt the playful pull between us, the teasing glances, the soft smiles, the way his hand lingered near mine, brushing against it now and then, each touch a promise and a question all at once. Finally, he leaned closer, just enough for our shoulders to touch, his voice dropping into that low, teasing murmur I had come to crave. "You're enjoying this more than you let on." I smirked, pretending to be coy, though my pulse betrayed me. Maybe I just like seeing you squirm a little." He chuckled, his eyes darkening with amusement and something tender. "Is that so?" He tilted his head, fingers brushing against mine once more. "Because I think I like seeing you this close, this unguarded." Before I could respond, the impulse that had been simmering all week flared. I leaned into him, letting my lips brush his shoulder, teasing, testing. He caught my gaze immediately, a slow smile spreading across his face, and then he leaned in, capturing my lips in a kiss that was tender, hungry, and utterly consuming. My hands rested lightly on his chest, feeling the steady beat beneath, the solid reassurance of him. It was the culmination of weeks of trust, of shared vulnerability, of playful flirtation that had slowly built into something undeniable. The kiss deepened, slow and deliberate, an unspoken promise of patience and passion, of partnership and protection. When we finally pulled back, breaths mingling, he rested his forehead against mine. "I've wanted that for a long time," he murmured. "So have I admitted, a rush of warmth flooding through me. And in that quiet moment, under the gentle sway of the tree, I knew we were no longer simply friends navigating a fragile path. We were partners, exploring a connection built on trust, teasing, and the promise of something enduring, ready to face whatever came next together. The days after that kiss felt like sunlight spilling into a space that had long been dim. Every time I saw Alex, there was an unspoken acknowledgement of what had shifted between us, a quiet, steady energy that was both thrilling and grounding. The tension of waiting, wondering, and longing had transformed into the certainty of presence. And it felt right. We settled into a rhythm that felt natural, each small moment strengthening the bond that had been teasing the edges of possibility for years. Morning coffees became our ritual, a gentle brush of hands across the counter, a shared laugh over a misread recipe, a glance that lingered just long enough to make my pulse quicken. These ordinary fragments of life carried extraordinary weight now, each one a reminder that love could be patient, playful, and profound all at once. One evening, Alex invited me to his small, cozy apartment. It smelled faintly of old books and polished wood, comforting and familiar. He had set up a playlist of soft jazz, the notes filling the space with warmth. I realized that for the first time in months, my shoulders weren't tense, my mind wasn't racing. I was simply here, present, safe, and entirely seen. He handed me a glass of wine, fingers brushing mine in a casual, electrifying touch. "To beginnings," he said, his smile teasing but sincere. "And to finally admitting we've been circling the obvious for far too long." I laughed, feeling the edges of old anxieties melt away. "To beginnings," I echoed, clinking my glass against his. We moved to the couch, sitting close enough that our legs touched, subtle sparks traveling up my spine at every contact. He shifted slightly, brushing a stray strand of hair from my face, his fingers lingering just enough to send warmth through me. The flirting, the teasing, the playful energy that had always existed between us now felt like a prelude to something more tangible, more real. "I've wanted to do this for ages," he murmured, his voice low and intimate. Before I could question or protest, he leaned in, capturing my lips in a kiss that was soft at first, exploratory, and then deepened into something urgent, consuming, and necessary. My hands found his chest, feeling the steady beat of him beneath my fingertips, grounding me in the moment. Every hesitation, every fear, every shadow of past disappointment evaporated in the heat of that embrace. When we finally pulled back, breathless and laughing quietly, his forehead rested against mine, eyes sparkling with the quiet triumph of finding something rare. "You're incredible," he whispered. "Patient, stubborn, brilliant, and completely impossible to ignore." I pressed my lips to his cheek, smiling. "Right back at you, you infuriating man. I think you've been my constant, even when I didn't realize it." The night stretched on in this tender intimacy. We shared stories, whispered secrets, and laughed until our sides ached. There was no rush, no pressure, no ghosts of past betrayals haunting the room. In Alex, I found a safe harbor, a partner who matched my intensity with patience, my wit with playfulness, and my passion with unwavering loyalty. Weeks later, as we walked hand in hand along the riverbank near my apartment, I realized how fully I had let myself open again. Alex's presence wasn't just comforting, it was invigorating. He made me feel powerful in my vulnerability, strong in my tenderness, and fully alive in my joy. At the edge of the water, he turned to me, eyes locking with mine. "You know," he said, a teasing lilt in his voice, "I could get used to this." "Us." I laughed softly, squeezing his hand. "Us is exactly where we're supposed to be. No running, no pretending, just us." And as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky with shades of gold and rose, I kissed him again, this time slow, unhurried, and final in its promise. The kiss sealed everything we had been circling for months: trust, passion, loyalty, and an unwavering commitment to face life together. For the first time in a long while, I didn't feel the weight of disappointment, betrayal, or uncertainty. I felt clarity. I felt joy. I felt love in its truest form. And I knew that whatever storms might come, Alex and I would navigate them together, side by side, hearts aligned, and finally, unbreakably united.